Let's move on from journalism, move on to education with regards to the misinformation age. What is happening with education? How does this relate? You want to pick it up, or should I start it?
You can go ahead and start, and I'll pick up on it.
Okay, fair enough. So, education in most countries, when we started teaching the peasants to read, throwing pearls at swine, it wasn't about making a more informed public or citizenry that could better participate in a democracy. First off, the schools for the peasantry in some countries uh, predates democracy. It was about making a better workforce. It was about giving some measure of access to trade, or in some cases to Bible. There are many different reasonings behind it, but the general was a better workforce, especially as the industrialization and the coalescing of cities. Uh, so that was its intent. Now, at the same time, you have the Enlightenment age, where mankind is put up on a pedestal. Some use the rhetoric that God, like Nietzsche says, God is dead, and then mankind was put in God's place as the ultimate authority figure and the ultimate ideal. Uh, and the Enlightenment age believed that anyone could be educated to become an enlightened and enormously talented person. So that narrative was somehow put together with the public education system, which was all about making a better Smith and not about making the next Aristotle. So we were told that education, it's the silver bullet. It's what will cure all of society ills. We just have to get as many people through school and high school and even university as possible, and then everyone will be enlightened and the world will be a better place. And we will even cure racism. We just have to educate people, then racism will no longer exist. And neither will war, of course, or poverty, or anything. Just educate people enough. And we are now educating a higher percentage of the population than ever before. In Europe, especially, a higher percentage of the population. Like, it is insane in the numbers. Like, the former government in Denmark set a goal of over 70% of the Danish youth should get a bachelor's or master's degree. Like, we are off the charts with how many people we put through higher education. And in Denmark, we are as bigoted as you can be with regards to our immigration. In Sweden, they deported 100,000 refugees, not immigrants, refugees. They were deported 100,000, and like so, it doesn't seem to be working. It's again one of these stories that we're telling ourselves.
Yeah, and I think
And
some BS opinion brings up and an important point, says there needs to be a desegregation between formal and public education and education. I think what education means is important to dissect and unpack a little bit. And as you described when we were first teaching the peasantry, it wasn't about education as in the holistic informing of an individual to be a member of the world, a citizen of the world. It was to make them a better smith, but it was just basically to try a different method than how knowledge had previously been passed, which was generally familially by, the blacksmith would teach their son or their kids, and then those kids would teach their kids, and that's how we passed information along. What that How that dynamic shifted during that time, or what was happening during that time, was what that did though was it gave the blacksmith in a disproportionate amount of power relative to his social standing as the blacksmiths and the workers moved down in social standing. And so like in that way, what you do by generalizing the talent, by making it to where you can get more people, you make people more replaceable. And if they're more replaceable, then they're less able to have differing opinions or to influence things in ways that are not effective for you. And so there's, whether it's intentional or not, there's benefits to broadening the amount of people that you're able to select from, as long as you keep them as cogs, as machine parts, so that if one tooth is, failing that you can just replace the cog is more effective than having to negotiate with the cog about why its tooth hurts, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, it does make some sense. We have a comment here from Dutch for Bernie, who says schools shouldn't teach religion. And I would say, okay, if that is true, well, quite a lot of the world is religious. It's quite a phenomenon. It represents literally billions of people. If schools shouldn't teach you about religion and what religion is, what on earth are they there for? If what you are really saying is that schools shouldn't be pressing a religious agenda and shouldn't be indoctrinating a religious agenda, I personally will agree with you. But if we take a nuanced view on it, well, schools have a tendency to teach democracy. That is a subjective and very biased view. Schools have a tendency to teach that science and objective fact is good. That's also a very subjective view and a belief. So if what is school for if not to teach about society as it is, as it has been, and as it could be? If school is not there to teach you how to think, to teach you how to obtain information, and to teach you how to make up your own mind, what is it there for? And if a person makes up his mind that, hey, for me, religion makes sense, could you please then stop hitting him or her over the head with that decision, as long as he is not hitting you? So let us just, school do not really teach democracy. Okay, as opinion, please challenge yourself. Please go to a school and find all the subjective messaging, the subliminal messaging, the allegiance to the flag. They teach the way that you talk in school and history about non-democratic society, about the past before democracy, before the founding fathers, the way that you talk about the founding fathers. Like, it is all extremely subliminal messaging on pro-democracy. So yeah, schools, society in general, but thus also schools teach and push democracy.
Well, that they're getting at is that they don't teach us about how to function in a democracy, or what an ideal democracy actually would entail versus the myth version of democracy and how it actually functions. Like, a lot of people think that we're voting for who's going to be the nominee, but we're not. We're voting for delegates who represent delegates who represent delegates who eventually at some point will represent actual people, and then eventually it ends up at the Electoral College, who, by all intents and purposes, besides some few vague state laws, are not legally obligated to listen to any of the votes that came before it. Those 270 or the 400 and some odd people in the Electoral College are free to choose whoever they want to be president. Like, that's how the system actually works.
Yeah.
And if some people are looking at, contemplating what if there's a four-party run, the Republicans push out Trump and the Democrats push out Bernie, what does that mean? And some people have come to the conclusion that Congress decides who's the president, which technically is true, but that would necessitate that the Electoral College just don't use their power to make that decision themselves, which would be highly unlikely. So, just on that, I guess it was a random tangent, but I think when people think about democracy and the way it's taught, I think you're right that they are taught a very propagandized version of democracy, and just as a lot of the stuff in education is. And I think another comment, I didn't catch who it was, but also mentioned about how it's that what we need to be taught is how to learn, how to critically think, how to decipher information, how to find resources, how to do those types of things. I think when I first started in school, or in college, they had a class where you went to the library and you learned how to use the library, and most people blew it off and it wasn't really important and it wasn't thought is like that's one of the most important things you can possibly learn in like all the fun stuff you're learning in psychology 101 or in this, that, or the other class. That's fun and it's useful for dinner conversations and stuff like that. But that course on how to find information and determine its credibility is probably one of the most important things that you can learn either in elementary school, high school, junior high, or any college and beyond. It's whenever you learn it, it's a good thing.
It is. So we have some discussion going on in Kagrin and AB's opinion are really going at it. Kagrin says schools teach a fantasy about democracy, and AB's opinion is clarifying his comment that what he meant was that they don't not teach what democracy actually is, they only teach a simplistic view of democratic engagement. We do not learn about activism or lobbying or etc. And Kagrin is also saying we have to teach our kids in a new, much more comprehensive way. We must stop tampering with history and science realities. Now, again, my bias kicking in. I see science, but okay. So yeah, I am almost in agreement with the last comment. So we must teach kids in a new and more comprehensive way. Now, I do not think what we should do is teach people reality, because reality is always extremely biased. I think we should teach people how to think. Not how to think as in, I want you to think in this specific way. I think we should teach people, yes, they should get a background web of knowledge, but that should be the background noise of education. That should be 1/10 of your classes, maybe 1/5 of your classes. That should be like getting some base facts of history, some base facts of society and how it works and how politics work. That should be the background noise. The rest of education should be how to debate, how to engage, how to think, how to change your mind, how to be empathic. Empathy is the way that you examine an issue from more than one view. I am of the belief that if you cannot argue for the Holocaust, then you do not understand the Holocaust enough and what made it happen to argue against it. What I mean is, if you want to argue against the Holocaust, you have to know what it actually is. And the only way you know what it actually is by setting yourself in the shoes of the people who perpetrated it, meaning you have to understand how they think. And when you understand how they think, you can see their reasoning, meaning you can now, using their reasoning, argue for the Holocaust, but you as a person are, I assume, against it.
Yeah. And, I was just gonna step in there real quick that like to pair off the anger germs and all that stuff. Like, what you have to make sure that you're doing is you're actually putting yourself in their shoes, not in the totem that's been constructed in your echo chamber.
Exactly. Like I read Mein Kampf as a part of my bachelor's degree, my paper. And when I read it, when I opened that book, I basically expected demons to come out and that I would have to like physically put a towel inside my head and clean it every other day, else this book would mesmerize me and make me into a Nazi and hate Jews. And then I opened it and started reading it. And like, he is extremely long-winded and he goes off on extreme tangents. I mean, like 10, 20 pages, and never comes back sometimes to where he was. And he doesn't write very well. He really doesn't. I can see the places where it's successful, this book, how it speaks to the anger of the time, these things. But this, like, evil, totemic book that we've been taught, like this, it is, most historians would agree that Mein Kampf is the most demonized and vilified object in all of history. The only thing that comes even close is Hitler himself.
At least in modern, like, in that we can understand modernly. Like, I'm sure there was probably some pretty hated people back in ancient times that were, or like in various periods
Yeah,
stuff.
but
Yeah,
universally, like, no matter, almost no matter where you are, if you mention Mein Kampf or Hitler, you'll get as a reaction.
yeah.
And so, actually reading that book made me realize how extremely biased and afraid of this book I was before I even read it. Now, I don't agree with more or less anything in this book, and as I said, it is such a badly written book. It's so hard to get through.
They are, in fact, words inside of the book, so I can't refute that. Like, it is a book. It exists.
Yeah, but to say that Mein Kampf holds a blueprint for the annihilation of the Jewish race is to flat out lie. It doesn't have that. He vilifies them, he demonizes them, and he says that they're in a struggle and a fight against them. Yes, but actually say they need to be exterminated, and like, he does not. Now, you can then argue that he uses coded language and things like that, and I'll be happy to take that argument with anyone and be shown the places where people think that this is happening. No problem. But to say that that this book turned the masses towards Hitler and it indoctrinated and hypnotized them, and it's like,
Those sounds like New York Times bestseller like taglines. You know what I mean? Like, that's what they sound like.
exactly.